Good evening, one and all. It is good to have you with us tonight. My name is Emily Towns, and I'm Dean of Vanderbilt Divinity School. The Vanderbilt Divinity School Howard L. Harrod Lecture was established to honor Harrod, the Oberlin Alumni Professor of Social Ethics and Sociology of Religion. Professor Harrod, who died in 2003, was on our faculty for some 34 years. He wrote widely with several books devoted to ethics and to Native American religions and cultures. The Harrod Lectures, which began in 2004, are intended to deal with aspects within any of the three general areas of Harrod's interests: social ethics, sociology of religion, and Native American religions and cultures. This year's Harrod Lecturer is Dr. Jennifer Harvey. Harvey is a writer, teacher, and activist who has long been engaged in works for racial justice and white anti-racism. Her books include the New York Times bestseller, Raising White Kids, Bringing Up Children in Racially Unjust America, and Dear White Christians, for those still longing for racial reconciliation. Dr. Harvey has written for the New York Times, CNN, and countless other publications, and is a widely sought after public speaker. She has appeared on nationally syndicated television and radio programs, including Good Morning America and CNN's Town Hall on Racism with Sesame Street, and as a guest on National Public Radio's All Things Considered with Michael Martin and It's Been a Minute with Sam Sanders. Dr. Harvey has been on faculty at Drake University for nearly 20 years and currently serves as the Associate Provost for Campus Equity and Inclusion. She is also ordained in the American Baptist Churches, USA. I take a personal moment of privilege to say how proud I am and thrilled I am that she's speaking with us tonight, where Dr. Harvey was the very first doctoral student I ever worked with, and I must say I am well pleased. Tonight, the title of her Harrod Lecture is Becoming the Ancestors We All Deserved, in a time where fundamentalisms all fail. After Dr. Harvey finishes her lecture, we will have a Q&A session. Please place your questions in the Q&A or chat, and we will get to as many as possible. Welcome to Vanderbilt Divinity School, Dr. Harvey. We look forward to what you have to say.
Good evening. It's an honor to have been invited to deliver this 2021 Harrod Lecture. And I want to thank Dean Towns, not only for the introduction and the affirming words about my work and journey, but also for this invitation. I also want to thank Shatika Brown for all the work of coordinating everything tonight and others of you who helped make this happen. And of course, I want to thank all of you who showed up and are here to share space and time with me this evening. I'm so grateful that you're here. So some days lately, I feel like we're living in a play being staged in the theater of the absurd. The plot is ridiculous. The script offers no way out, and the joke is on the characters, and that's us. Like, how long will they just keep going along with the storyline? This feeling hits me in the most mundane of moments, like when I'm driving my kids to school. Cars are sacred places when you have children. Some of you might know that. They're kind of liminal space where divine truths will sometimes unexpectedly break through. So my kids will be chitter-chattering about soccer, placing bets on whether or not they'll get to have ice cream after practice, which means before dinner, because, well, Dairy Queen is right on the way home and they know I'm a softie and that I too love ice cream. And then suddenly they'll start just like channeling truths about kindness and wholeness and brokenness and pain, absurdity and hope. My 10-year-old will just turn from their bets on ice cream to their older sister and say, H, how sad is it that humans didn't realize we needed the earth to survive? Notice the past tense. Like we are the earth. What have we been thinking? This particular conversation happens the same week that the last UN climate report came out. So I glance in the rearview mirror, kind of wondering, should I offer reassurance? Would that be true? But when I do, all I can see is their little face, but just their eyes. We're a full 15 minutes from school, and my child is already masked to the gills because they know that on the way to school means headed into a virus battle zone in the state of Iowa. And that's the kind of mundane when it will hit me. We are living in Octavia Butler prophecy, and I'm just driving along as if things are what? Normal? Gonna be fine? For some of us right now, the future seems so tentative, we can barely imagine there will be one. It takes audacious hope just to drop our children off at school, let alone to imagine the next generation has a future, let alone, again, one that looks anything like it will allow some thriving. I mean, why would we even talk about making them wait for dessert? So 10-year-olds are still in the period of life when brain development is going on rapidly. Their neurological software and hardware is being built. My child, this means, has lived a full 1/5 of their life, 1 day out of 5, with a level of unpredictability, uncertainty, fear, and direct contact with the radical contingency of life at a level that is absolutely affecting who they will be and how they will be, no doubt about it. But even for those of us older than 10, I turned 50 this year, the level of sustained uncertainty, fear, and daily contact with the unknown we are experiencing is also neurologically significant. And when I say that, I'm not only talking about the pandemic, though I'm of course talking about that. I would say this state began in about 2016, when longstanding realities of white supremacy and environmental crisis and so much more were both galvanized and catalyzed into a civic culture of daily terror. It's been neurologically significant. In the book, How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy, Jenny Odell writes about taking back our attention. It's one of our most precious resources, she says, our attention. And hers is a beautiful argument. She writes about choosing to what and where, and to whom and how we pay attention is a form of agency that grows love. And she says that choosing and choosing again can become the foundation for a new kind of ethics. These words ring true with the teaching that we've also received from Adrienne Marie Brown, the high priestess of the Church of Octavia Butler, who reminds us what we give our attention to is what we grow. So there's a moment in Odell's book, and she's describing one of the counterfoils to the agency of choosing where to put our attention. And she describes how every time something big happens, and really, when was the last time we got through a week without something big happening? Every time that happens, connectivity, social media ensures that shock waves catapult like lightning through our collective nervous system, through our sympathetic nervous system. And it's really harmful. It's like putting your foot down on the gas pedal when you're at a red light. And the thing is, I knew exactly the feeling she was talking about when I read that. I could feel it in my body. I've learned just enough about neurology, mostly through therapy, to know that the levels of uncertainty and fear that we're experiencing have us collectively in kind of a state of fight or flight or fear or fawn. We are collectively in the state where the amygdala, the sort of more primitive part of our brain, gets triggered and kind of takes over because we're experiencing danger. But meanwhile, the ways of being that we most need to cultivate in order to nourish and grow and heal and envision our way through this catastrophic moment, the ways of being we need to make it worth it to drop our kids at school on a Monday morning, those are precisely the ways of being that are most difficult to manifest when we're in a state of fight or flight. And so actually, out of respect for that recognition, and because we are embodied creatures living a very, very complicated relationship with our bodies right now. I mean, for goodness sake, I'm standing in Iowa talking to a computer. Before I go any further, I want to actually invite you to do something with me. If you are able and willing, I want to invite you to put your hand on your chest, slow down for a minute, and take 3 breaths with me. And while you do it, I want you to tell yourself, in this moment, I am safe. There's no place I need to be other than here right now. Breathe with me. In this moment, I am safe. There's no place I need to be other than here right now. Thank you for that. So here's what I have been worrying about for us justice seeker types, for those of us who are longing to co-create a world in which we can all flourish. First, the attraction of fundamentalism. I am so ready these days to whip my lists of dogmas out of my back pocket at a moment's notice to provide clarity. And this is a survival response to uncertainty. Second, purity tests. Let me tell you, I also know exactly who the enemy is. I want to know that exactly who the enemy is, so I can know exactly who we need to get rid of. And third, that the urgency and intensity of the need to create conditions on which our survival does in fact depend seems to be the enemy of the gentleness and care and rest that all of our bodies and our souls must also have if we're going to together give our attention to what we need to and what we need to actually hope to create those conditions. So first and second, I want to give you my credentials on fundamentalism and purity tests. The white people that raised me did it in church. And on a slow week, my family could be found at Bethel Baptist no less than 3 times, no less than 3 times. That was a slow week. Denver's Christian radio station played in our living room day in and day out. And every Saturday morning, while my siblings and I laced up our cleats to go play soccer in the local park, James Dobson's voice seeped in through the airwaves during Children's Bible Hour. And seeped is definitely the right word. Billy Graham's images adorned our home, but my Grammy, who I loved, she especially loved Billy Graham. She would read and reread his books. She kept them stacked on her headboard. And sometimes when I got to spend the night at her house, I would find her having fallen asleep mid-page with a book drooped over her sweet face, Graham's image with his dimpled chin and smoldering eyes staring at me off the back cover. My Grammy was also our church pianist, the preschool Sunday school teacher, and the director of our church's TUC preschool. TUC meaning train up a child from the Proverbs, train up a child in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it. All 6 of my younger siblings went through Sunday school and preschool with Grammy before they ever hit 1st grade. Basically, Bethel was a sun we orbited. This was a white evangelical Christianity that was more than a belief system or set of values. It was an ethos and a world. It was a culture and a community. Bethel nurtured an ecosystem through which I came to understand myself as a self and make sense out of my relationships with others. Now, one of the things I knew because of that ecosystem was that God so loves the world. God's love of world was a fundamental existential framework for me. And I believed at that point that God so loves the world actually meant the whole world. It sounds almost bizarre to say it, given our current civic nightmare, but it was that ecosystem that actually positioned me to be completely captivated and compelled by liberation theology, and specifically by James Cone's work in my college years, the most definitive theological encounter of my life, and eventually on to further work with brilliant scholars and activists such as Dean Towns. But long before that, the neurology, the neurological responses of fight or flight, the responses that lead to fundamentalism and purity tests, they were practically hardwired into my consciousness. There's tons of critiques I'd make now of the ecosystem in which I was formed. Of course, the sexism was everywhere. Women didn't even touch communion practically in my church. They washed the dishes later. And I learned homophobia and transphobia before I even knew that queer and trans people existed. But the critique I'm interested in tonight is how being saved rested on threat and fear. I cannot tell you the number of times I'd sit as a child and obsessively give repeated thanks I'd been born into a Christian family. The dumb luck of such a near miss with eternal damnation would literally make me sweat when I was a kid. And of course, in my ecosystem, Christian meant Baptist, Catholics, Lutherans, Methodists, not included. My dad told me his conversion story one time, and in the middle of it, he described walking through the streets of Denver, Colorado, for hours, getting soaking wet in freezing, pouring rain on a day in his 20s when he was feeling such depressive despair, he was on the verge of suicide. And my dad stumbled across a Methodist church, and he started banging on the door because he was desperate for help. But no one came to the door. That was a good thing, my dad told me. That was the day, Jenny, that God saved me from the Methodists. So you see, I learned young to know exactly what to believe, and at all times. I learned young that dogmas shrunk to the size of a 5-point list and put into my pocket would keep me safe, and I knew exactly who the enemy was. I mean, it was the Methodists. There was no art in that world, just answers, no questions, only Bible verses, no complexity, humanity, or grace. People were either saved or unsaved, good or bad, and if they were unsaved, AKA bad, we knew exactly what to do with them. And if our evangelism didn't work, we knew exactly how far away to stay from them. So fundamentalism to me feels as familiar as home. Now, ever since, some folks in this country became determined to put death culture on steroids, starting in about 2016, I have had to constantly return and pay conscious attention to the question, what am I supposed to be doing? And I suspect that's been necessary for a lot of us here, for you pastor types and teacher types and social workers and organizers. For me, it's become a matter of nearly daily spiritual discipline, not that I am successful at doing it every day, to try to return my attention to my basic sense of call. The world's on fire. Everything is needed. Okay, Jen, what's my call in this moment? To whom am I called? To which work am I to remain faithful? Where am I putting my attention? For me, when I'm tempted to get abstract and bigger to respond to that fire, it's meant instead getting smaller and more local, but going deeper. Doubling or tripling down on work against white supremacy, yes. But when that doing feels too focused or too local, reminding myself and understanding it's right where I'm supposed to be. That's my specific work, and it's also a particular entree point into and through and with others on climate change and this political nightmare and COVID and. When existential absurdities has me start to question why I'm taking my kids to school, returning to my call to white anti-racist movement building, and especially where I live, where I work, where I eat and sleep, helps me actually dial down and hone in and tend to my nervous system, and maybe even tend to and pastor the nervous system of my community of accountability with a kind of gentleness and care. So for years now in the world where I locate my call, many of us have been collectively writing what I think of as kind of a handbook of do's and don'ts for white anti-racism. So for example, white people, pass the mic. You've probably heard that. That's a directive near the top of the do list when we start talking about behaviors and postures white people need to learn and to unlearn if we're going to seek to grow our justice capacity. And we absolutely need such a handbook. The collective failure over time of those of us who are white to have long ago shown up ready, reliably, and sustainably in the work of anti-racism and justice runs so deep. It's so deep. It's a formation problem. That is a much deeper problem than white people just not caring about racism or having active ill will towards Black and Latinx communities or about the well-being of Native communities and Asian American communities. Not caring and ill will are certainly real problems, but those are problems more at the surface. The formation problem has to do with generational inherited legacies. It's about the entirety of the contexts and spaces in which we've been socialized as white people for our entire lives. And to put it quite simply, most US Americans were not socialized for justice. Full stop. Our ancestors, living or dead, certainly did not cultivate racial justice, connectivity to the well-being of others as a lived communal value. They just didn't. And of course, I don't have to tell you, this is in stark contrast to many, maybe most people of color whose families and broader communities do and have actively teach and taught, yes, in complex and diverse ways. I don't want to overgeneralize, but do actively teach and have taught justice and race and anti-racism as necessities, not just for survival, though surely for that, but for thriving. And so Black communities, for example, have always generated generational knowledge and wisdom. And in the process of transmitting that knowledge and wisdom, the formation of the next generation takes place, and legacies of resistance are passed on and nurtured as familial and communal journey and work and identity. But unless a white American is explicitly socialized into cultures of justice or intentionally nurtured over years in communal contexts, which is very, 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 very few of us, man, when we hit the moment where some of us, myself included, go, oh my gosh, wait, what? We have a racial justice crisis in this nation? Well, combine that with family structures ensconced in white silence and pressures to not break it, with most of us having lived deeply segregated contexts, and with all of us having also been shaped by structural white racial hierarchy, well, then, even if our oh wait, what moment brings with it genuine strong yearnings for justice, we still literally don't even know where to begin. And in fact, we're not even sure where to start or who to turn to begin. So we need handbooks. Pass the mic. Directive number 1. But there's a real challenge here. Our list of do's and don'ts are also full of paradoxes. I suspect some of you may have noticed this. Right alongside pass the mic, for example, sits an equally true and urgent instruction. White people, speak up. Stop expecting people of color to do all the talking. You see the paradox? They're both true. Here's another one. White people have got to listen to and center and take seriously the experiences of people of color. Right alongside that true directive, hey, my white people, let's stop expecting people of color to educate us. We need to take on some of that ourselves. Here's another one. White people cannot be trusted to teach ourselves anti-racism. We will reproduce white supremacy culture every time. Yep. But right alongside that, white people, we've got to do our own work. There's paradox everywhere. So I want to be really clear that not only do white folks like me, yes, need the handbook of do's and don'ts. More importantly, there's also nothing wrong with paradox. In fact, some of the most truthful and meaningful ways of living in this complicated world are found when we figure out, how do I live with integrity amidst paradox, right? I mean, I participate in the US political process by voting every single time. I did it last week. I even have strong feelings about the outcome of our elections. But at the very same moment, I'm never confused about the limits that anyone in elected office in this nation state, the limits they're constrained by. And I certainly acknowledge this nation state is an inherently colonial settler white supremacist project. I know whose land this is. This is native land. I know the founding fathers were enslavers, and yet I still vote. That's a paradox. Pass the mic or speak up. Which is it? The answer is yes. Listen to people of color or stop expecting people of color to educate me. Which is it? The answer is yes. I'm not afraid of paradox. I am very afraid of fundamentalism. I am afraid when paradox gets flattened and turned into dogma. When paradox becomes instead literal truths with a capital T, universally applicable in all times and places, so easy, they become answers we can shrink and stuff in our back pocket. And I'm more worried about the allure of fundamentalism in the spaces where I'm working with others to get more white folks off the sidelines and into active journey against white supremacy than I've ever been before. And I'm going to tell you why. First of all, we dare never forget that white supremacy is hydra-headed. It's dynamic. It defies ration and logic. It will lay options before us for which there are rarely perfectly good or correct responses. And so when we start to overuse and over-apply concepts, give them to one another as easy answers with no nuance and context, we actually start to short-circuit our ability to develop the complex embodied understandings, the dynamic capacities and strategies to grow wisdom, the wisdom we need to be growing in order to actually collectively and over time destabilize white supremacy. In fact, the more we overuse and simplify, the more likely we become to do things and create cultures and strategies that actually strengthen white supremacy instead. And so I want to give you an example of this. I shared a story in raising white kids about my nephew, who is Black, about an experience he had of racism at the hands of a white child. And I described in it how a second white child intervened. Basically, the second kid heard what was said to my nephew, and he stepped in. This was a friend of my nephew's. He stepped in, he said, "Hey, that's racist." He pointed it out. He called it out. The kids were like 8 when this happened. Oh man, with more and more frequency in the last couple of years, I have had other white people come up to me, either in person or virtually, whip out their anti-racist fundamentals from their back pocket and show me where in the text it says white saviorism is forbidden. And so maybe that second little white boy should have just stayed out of it. Of course, the implication here, the larger implication, is that white folks should stay silent and do nothing rather than risk an imperfect step up alongside with someone who's being targeted, because we don't want to do a white savior move. This kind of literalism scares the hell out of me. I am seeing some similar tendencies with white fragility. Such an important concept, so important. It enables us to develop insights to call out predictable kinds of white behavior that strengthen racist dynamics in collective space, especially multiracial space. Used well, white fragility can also help us think about the moral muscle and the resilience white people need to build for anti-racism. Yes, good stuff. White fragility also helps us get at, recognize, talk about, and maybe challenge the very specific problem of white women weaponizing our tears, like Amy Cooper in Central Park, calling the police in fake hysteria and putting Christian Cooper's life in literal danger, literal life-threatening danger. Or when white tears suck the oxygen out of the room, say in a diversity training, taking the spotlight from Black women when they talk about the racism they contend with, not only every day, but often at the hands of white women. Yes, white fragility is a critical concept. But we've got a fundamentalist use of white fragility emerging, and it's actually short-circuiting vital growth for justice. Activists and scholars and writers and artists of color, everyone from James Baldwin to Ella Baker to many others, and even anti-racist white sheroes like Anne Braden started telling us and teaching us so long ago, white folks need to be in the fight against white supremacy because it's about our liberation too. White people need to develop deep soul awareness that white supremacy is death culture. We're not fighting for others or just on their behalf. We're fighting because we come to know at a cellular level that our lives are at stake too. Deep, truthful reckoning with that, a reckoning that actually changes the course of someone's life, requires us to hit a point where the grief and the lament of the ways that white supremacy has malformed and toxified our lives, our genealogies, has made us complicit in violence, has to come out. We need to feel that. We might even need to rage. We need to cry. We might even need to wail about the reality that we didn't have the ancestors we deserved. White supremacy, in fact, would rather we not do that. It would like to keep us numb. Numbness to emotion is a weapon in white supremacy's arsenal. And so it worries me more than a little when, as I'm walking with other white people who are starting to wake up to this grief, and they start going, as I'm experiencing more and more in the last couple of years, oh, wait, why am I crying? This isn't about me. Why am I being so white fragile? And they start to just stuff it back down. Friends, the more white people collectively do that, the more we are going to lose traction for the spiritual exploration that is necessary to grow a radically different culture than the one that we inherited. If we are going to grow a collective communal value for racial justice in some white communities, more white communities, any white communities, something white communities have never grown, we've got to grieve and let grief give way to a full-blown embodiment for the fight for our own liberation and the liberation of all of us against death culture. So the last thing I want to quickly point out is the way that fundamentalisms also just like turn on themselves and do really weird things. If you oversimplify white fragility, you actually set the stage for white saviorism. Here's how it goes. Oh, white people who are genuine in their anti-racist journey, they're superheroes. They never need to feel feelings. They also never get tired. White saviorism at its best. Or the way I keep increasingly hearing white people who are trying to journey into anti-racism describe any, even a thoughtful and respectful and curious disagreement with a person of color as a sign of being so fragile, so white fragile, right? I disagreed with that person. My white fragility showed up and I'm like, what? That just sets the stage for something else. White romanticizing, right? As in A, everything any person of color ever says is always correct. Sets the stage for tokenizing, as in B, this must mean people of color always all agree with one another. Otherwise, we would have nothing to ever question or struggle about in terms of where we might engage our own critical thinking. See how weird this can get? Of course, once you've taken paradox that requires us to seek truth and grow and experience discernment and wisdom, and you turn those things into dogmas, flatten them, you're only a hop, skip, and a jump away from imposing purity tests, and you can figure out who exactly is saved and unsaved, good and bad, and then you can dismiss and expunge and demonize the bad ones. I am watching my white students on this campus where I teach do this right now, not among opposed folks, right? That's a different problem, different challenge. Among students who all desire to become good anti-racist allies. They're just like chewing each other up. This is worrying me. The more intense the crisis of white supremacy is, and in this moment, it is intense and urgent, the more tempting fundamentalisms and purity tests become. It's a panic response. It's a panic response. And I get it, because as I said, for me, fundamentalism is like coming home. We're desperate for dogmas that can give us answers and create safety and offer certainty about who it is, what it is we're supposed to be doing and how exactly to do it, and in every single moment, and precisely who the enemy is. But growing anti-racist, committed white capacity for justice is complex. We have to grow roots. We have to allow rivers to flow into collective spaces in ways that are as deep and over time, as generational, as complex and nuanced among white people, as families of color and people of color and communities of color have long since been growing and allowing to flow. There's just no one easy and quick template for simply accomplishing that. It's a long and a slow work. We have to be about it every single day and in every space. And it's going to look a little bit different in each day and in each space. And it's also going to look different for each of us, depending on what our own story and social location is. But there's nothing easy, and there's no quick fixes about it. No list of concepts is going to get us there. And we are certainly not going to yell at each other our way to it. If Adrienne Marie Brown is right, that what we pay attention to is what we grow, if we yell at each other our way through this, well, we're only going to grow more of that, even among us justice seekers. So what do? We need to become the ancestors that we all deserved. Laayla F. Saad has created, I think, one of the most beautiful and powerful frameworks for understanding what we should be paying attention to in this moment. She invites us all into the spiritual dimension of contending with legacies of oppression that we've all been born into, by inviting us to understand the work of justice as the journey of striving to become a good ancestor. And I just love that so much. So lately, when I'm most tempted, and right now I'm tempted a lot, to whip out my list of dogmas to see if I get to good, bad, my way, away from this white person right here. Lately, I'm trying to slow down and pay attention to Saad's question instead. Jen, how do you become a good ancestor? When I do that, the first thing I've begun to notice is that it helps de-escalate my whole nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight amygdala triggered piece of myself that's been triggered, stays triggered right now. The second thing I notice is an opening to humanity. It goes something like this: oh yeah, Jen, this person didn't have good ancestors and they deserved them as much as you did. And then, and this is the unfolding brilliance of Saad's work, it's not that humanizing or opening move becomes an excuse to tolerate or ignore racist behavior. No, not that it lets you let folks off the hook. No, it doesn't even mean we never set boundaries and stop over-investing in some folks. No, the brilliance is that the question comes back to me. It invites me to again plant myself in this particular time and particular place and particular set of circumstances, not the particular time, place, or circumstances I wish I was living in, and to just ask myself, how do I continue to become a good ancestor as I engage this person in this moment? And even with but also looking beyond the fire that's raining down on both of our heads, the fire that's in this moment also making me tempted to throw them into the fires of eternal damnation. That's the question that I'm trying to pay attention to. There's never one right and universally applicable answer to that question. There's no one thing for different circumstances or relationships, but if we give our attention to Saad's question, a local, particular, very embodied ethic starts to emerge and grow slowly over time. It becomes a way to really pay attention to what it means to journey with one another in very difficult circumstances. It allows us to discover and tend practices that help discern and uncover and cultivate the work that must be ongoing, is not going to be finished in our lifetimes, to develop habits that allow us to persist in relationship building and activist commitments in spaces that are often and probably actually usually messy and almost always difficult to sustain. Giving attention to Saad's question invites us to dwell with the possibility that as we reach to heal inherited legacies, we actually are creating different legacies for those who come next. Resmaa Menakem's work is helping us with this too. In My Grandmother's Hands, Menakem talks about the ways that racialized trauma is living on in all of our bodies and being passed down generationally. He describes how white body supremacy is a response to trauma, the trauma of perpetrating violence. And Menakem insists that racial healing will not come primarily through the intellect, nor only through progressive politics. And having spent enough time in and with both of those things, both of which remain important, I know he's right. That's not how healing comes. He says the work is to grow anti-racist cultures, anti-racist white cultures, which he says culture is a stickier and more full phenomena than just intellect or policies. I'm not really sure how we do that. I really don't know, but I'm finding myself wanting to pay attention to that question too. How do cultures grow? I know they grow out of sharing time and space together and engaging in practices together. I know they grow from repeating rituals and sharing experiences and sometimes taking risks together. I know when we engage in communal and collective ways of being with one another in a space of yearning and reaching for justice commitment, that over time, we will develop inside understandings and shared language and new stories, the ability to recognize meaning in nonverbal cues, where we can learn to walk into a room and immediately feel in our bodies that something's starting to go down that's dangerous to justice, and we immediately will know and have a sense of who our allies are, and we can make eye contact with them, and with just a nod of acknowledgement, get on board with a strategy to handle a situation. I know that's some of how cultures grow. These are the kinds of connections and capacities long and well developed among diverse communities of color. And we're at the point in white anti-racist movement building where intentionally exploring how we grow a new culture has to come into the conversation. Because in fact, it's through culture that you learn when to pass the mic and when to speak up. You don't learn that through a handbook of do's and don'ts. It becomes a learned knowing and wisdom. So I want to say two quick things before I start to close. First, I feel it's important that I state it very plainly that I am not, and I will never be, the white person who weighs in on how Black people and other diverse peoples of color and communities of color do or don't engage white folks who are on white anti-racism journeys. There are lots of models out there. I've benefited from many of them, even including many different kinds of them. And straight up, my assumption is this: in the multiracial work of growing anti-racism and anti-white supremacy coalitions, the question of becoming a good ancestor means very different things for very different racial and ethnic communities in that shared work. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit in the Q&A. And the second thing is, I've focused in a granular way here on white anti-racism because that's the call I return to. But your entree point or your particular call might be totally different or sort of different, or it might be similar, but you come at it from a very different social location. But whatever it is, I know that you too have a call to faithfulness in a world, even a world on fire. And so I'm really curious what you're seeing in your entree point, in your work. Are similar kinds of challenges manifesting in diverse types of justice work as we all experience these fears and uncertainty and levels of danger that trigger our amygdala? And if so, might paying attention to Saad's question, how do I become a good ancestor, help slow you down and open you up in precisely the ways that are both most difficult when fear and danger are high, but also most vital for true survival and thriving? I'd also love to talk about that, other parts of this work in the Q&A. So how do we become good ancestors, whatever our call? I will tell you that as I've paid more and more attention and lived with that question, I've started to realize that some of what I need to respond to it, I actually learned as I began to leave fundamentalism, real actual fundamentalism, and move into liberationist spaces, complex, messy, diverse as they have been. So one, we need communities of accountability. Communities of accountability matter. We're not going to yell at each other our way out of this moment. No. Who am I here with and in my actual local context? To whom am I paying attention? Whose back do I have and how do they know it? And who has my back? Communities of accountability are key to be able to continually return to a sense of whatever's going on, I'm here and I'm safe. And here's how I know. Second, communities of accountability matter. I recently heard the brilliant organizer, Carrie Kelly, say that part of what's happening in the fire-laden implosion of so-called cancel culture, there goes the amygdala again, is that we're not having and don't know how to have the actual conversation we need to be having about accountability. And that conversation, she said, listen to this, it's actually a conversation about belonging, as in, I'm holding you accountable because I need you. I'm holding you accountable because you matter. I'm holding you accountable because you are necessary. And third, we're all inheritors of a shared legacy. It's all connected. We are all suffering because more of us have not had good ancestors. So how do we enjoin one another to imagine and envision and move into the journey of becoming good ancestors now? What shifts in the how of our complex justice seeking if we frame the question that way more often? When I think about how to find the audacious hope to drop my kids off at school or to make them wait until after dinner for dessert, which most days, some days I do, but sometimes I don't. I found myself realizing that while yes, my relationship with Christianity and certainly the fundamentalism that brought it to me in my formative years has changed dramatically over the course of my life, I keep finding that all these years later, I still do believe that God so loves the world, as in the whole world, as in all of us. And so then I return to one of the most important stories in the Christian tradition, to me, the one about the women who go to the tomb 3 days after Jesus has been executed. Their names are Mary, and Salome, and they went carrying spices because they were going to tend a body. They fully expected to find a corpse. Can you imagine as they walked, the pain these women were in? I think you probably can. Their grief and dislocation, I think we can imagine that too. They'd not only just lost someone they dearly loved, but they'd watched him die a painful, gruesome death. And they must have also been so afraid because they'd just spent months hanging around in public with a guy who now, under pressure of mob justice, the state has pronounced guilty and proceeded to kill. Talk about the amygdala being in a state of fight or flight. What's so amazing in this story is that the women go anyway. They walk together. They go through the grief and the fear. They go willing to bear witness to death, to look loss in the face. And because they do, only because they do. It's the women who are the first in this story of death to experience new life. They get to the tomb and there's a guy who turns out to be an angel, and he shows up and he says, guess what? Jesus isn't here because he's alive. And guess what else? Not only is he alive, but you're about to see him. And suddenly, the order of things is totally overturned, and the loss and the seeming permanency of death turns out not to be so. Good thing they sent their kids to school that morning. Mary, and Salome learn that the life-givingness of connection, a vision for the flourishing of all, the sense of possibility despite the current circumstances, all of which they'd known as part of the community of which Jesus was a part, it's not gone. It's right there. Mary, and Salome chose to honor their grief by journeying together, stand collectively at the tomb, and as a result, they come to know new life. So, because it turns out I still believe God so loves this ever-aching, beautiful world currently on fire, I want and need to continue to slow down and walk. I want to feel, I need to grieve, because I want to live. I want all of us to live. And the living high priestess and saint of all things Octavia Butler, Adrienne Marie Brown, constantly encourages those of us yearning to grow a world of justice and flourishing. She reminds us that uncertainty on a journey where we choose where we place our attention, choose to pay attention what it is we need to grow, is to be expected. The journey, she says, is breathtakingly new and uncertain because, she says, we're shaping the future we long for, but have not yet experienced. What a relief, those words. They're an aspiration to keep going when the way feels so difficult or unclear, because of course it's difficult and unclear. None of us have ever experienced the kind of world that so many of us are longing to live in. And yet in the same moment that Brown's words are aspirational, they're also a declaration. We are shaping the future we long for. We are. And we're doing it by knowing this work as becoming the ancestors we all deserved, the ancestors our descendants need us to be right now and to become, and that it starts right here, where you are, where I am, right now. Because there's no place we need to be other than here. Thank you.
Thank you. I am near speechless, a place I rarely go. Before we start, I'm going to give folks a little bit of time to start filling up the Q&As. Where did you learn to be so hopeful?
I don't know that I am, actually. I really think that I think of hope as a choice. I think I learned, especially from Black women who I think of and experienced in really formative, important decades of my life, as making really clear that despair is just simply not an option. And I don't know that the opposite of despair is hope, but I know that hope is a choice, and it's different than optimism. It's different than assuming everything's going to be fine or that there's some undercurrent eternal promise that it will be. But it is a choice about a way of being today, because I'm accountable, because I need to be accountable, because I matter and I'm needed and necessary, as we all are. So I think that's how I think about it. It's a word I struggle with, but I don't want to throw out, but to me, it feels like agency to sort of make a choice about it.
Just so you know, one person wrote, "Thank you so much. Your hope took a bit of the bend out of my shoulders."
Oh,
And I happen to know that this is a Black woman who is saying this to you.
oh, thank you. Thank you. We all need that, don't we? Out of the bend of our shoulders.
Every once in a while. So I'm going to switch over now to the Q&A. There are a few more things there.
Okay.
This is a question from Jessica Vasquez Torres.
Hi, Jessica.
How might theological education interrupt how we have learned to be distracted by purity tests, treat each other as disposable, and avoid paradox? How might it have to be different? What might we have to abandon?
Oof. Well, for that very simple question, my response is I think we need to be living actively with those questions. And that's not me copying out. There's a couple of thoughts I'm having. One, I find myself in this sort of, it's also kind of a paradox in my life, in some ways more and more removed from the institutional church and institutional theological education, partly because professionally I've ended up in a different place, but also sort of the reeling that I've done relative to white Christian cultures in light of how passive and complicit it's been for the last 5 years plus. Just like I've kind of like, I'm almost out. But I think, but at the same time, and here's the paradox, theology is what continues to draw me in. It's the only place where I find life, not hope, perhaps, although where I have learned to choose hope, right? So I mean, I think about theological education needing to throw out the models of where we think like what we're doing is producing experts who are going to go serve in these sort of discrete, traditional, like longstanding congregations that are somehow going to change and save the world. It's not going to happen. And so theological education can imagine ways that we can invite. I mean, I think about my experience at Union Theological Seminary, which was challenging, especially my master's degree, when I showed up to Union and I'm like, hi, you know, white evangelical here who just read James Cone. I love the Black Jesus. And oh my gosh, thank goodness, Black people in that space and Latina and Latinx people in that space and Native people like really held me to account for that. And I, you know, like I was in a community that contended with difference and challenge and called each other out and in, but in a process that I don't want to say was like a commitment to community, because it's not that everyone was like choosing to be in community with everyone else, but there was kind of a commitment to community through worship and ritual that meant if you showed up long enough in that contending, new things could grow. And I don't know what that means for theological education in terms of you know, a curricular journey, but I know that the community piece, the praxis of doing justice work together, because that always gets us into the real mess, right? And we need to dwell there because we learn things that we don't learn from our heads. And I mean, maybe I'm just old school, like back to the reflexive praxis thing. And then we reflect intellectually on what we're experiencing. There's just, I mean, I think there's so much there, but I think choosing to dwell with those questions that Jessica just asked, as opposed to thinking that in many of the spaces, Vanderbilt is, I think, an exception. There's a few that are growing an exception to this. Continuing to dwell in the models that we've been using for however long are going to somehow mean anything other than continuing shrinkage and decline and decay. I mean, that's just the reality. So, but I don't know that I'm the best person because I'm in churches a lot, but I'm not really in the church that much these days. That's just honest.
Next question. Thank you so much for this. So spot on. Do you have any suggestions for how to cultivate communities of accountability?
So I don't have like universally applicable suggestions, but I can give you an example from my own journey. We have a pretty vibrant SURGE chapter here in Des Moines. SURGE stands for Showing Up for Racial Justice. It's the sort of network of chapters committed to getting more white people off the sidelines. My sister and I here in Des Moines helped start Des Moines' version of it. Des Moines is a very segregated city. Iowa is a very white state. We started a chapter of Surge in 2015. I know there's a lot of problems with Surge. Ours actually is quite accountable. And one of the ways that looks is we've got kind of a couple tiered model. We do a lot of ongoing basic skills building to anyone who wants to show up to Surge. Anyone can come, but it usually ends up being mostly white folks. But we don't just sort of read things together. We also bring in folks who've been journeying longer. We kind of recognize that you can grow capacity as you journey longer. And we use those folks as kind of local experts, white folks and folks of color, to sort of engage in sort of educational ways. But we also then have a frontline commitment to local people of color-led organizations that are always our first turn in terms of accountability. So for fundraising, if that's the need, or an action is called for and we get invited to, partner or take the lead sometimes, whatever it might be. And what I'm noticing is over time that communities of accountability, which have then become very multiracial for us, even in a very segregated Des Moines context, grow because we've got both interracial, multiracial connections of all different kinds that start to grow. There's some of them are financial, but then also when you show up and organize with people a lot, you build relationships, right? And I'm not romanticizing that those relationships are always mutual or romanticizing them, but they're real because I show up when someone I know calls me and says, my son just got picked up by the police, right? And white folks are learning to hold each other accountable, but not in the sort of shout out way. I mean, we've got some of that here, but the fundamentalist ways that are really worrying me among white folks, more in a like, oh, we also break bread together sometimes. We laugh, our kids hang out with each other. And so we're collectively growing a different collective language and way of showing up in ways that's not only activism or only fundraising, it is those things, but is also connection and care. We eat together. So that's a really local model, is the both and of whiteness being attended to responsibly with meaningful, accountable relationship with people of color, organizations that are people of color led, and then a long-term model where we don't think, oh, we're going to create a relationship of accountability by calling up the NAACP and saying, hey, we're going to be accountable to you. Like, it's messier than that, but we've just kept at it and it's grown slowly over time so that now people have, there's some real networks that weren't here 7 years ago, 8 years ago. I know who's going to call me if I screw something up. And that's good.
Well, it also, what I'm also hearing is that you are humanizing one another.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, it's so hot in my office. Yeah.
And that builds community a lot more than sort of looking at people as representatives of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next, before I do the next question, just flagging that our Cal Turner program for moral leadership in the professions is sponsoring a limited number of copies of Dear White Christians and Raising White Kids to the audience. Please email Lane C. Walters. Her email address is in the chat with your name and mailing address, and she will send it your way.
Great, thanks.
Okay, now back to the Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your passion for justice and community. Can you speak to models or practices of restorative justice for use when calling someone in?
Well, I'm not sure I can, because it so depends on the relationship and the context in which the restoration of relationships is needed. And again, it's not that I think that's not an important question or I'm trying to like sidestep it, but I deeply believe one of the things that we've got to get so clear about is how contextual all of this is, which is why I'm so willing to, even though it makes me pretty nervous, to like kind of start saying, hey, we need to ease up on the whole white fragility thing. I really think we're messing some stuff up. Because like if the calling in is not a real relationship, then it's more like you need a model that's like holding someone to account in sort of a structural way, right? You can't rely on, I mean, you can still humanize people when you call them, build a restorative justice model of whatever that might be, whether it's okay, person who there's not a real relationship, you have some restorative work to do. Here's some things that the community that's been harmed says that would look like. Let's have a conversation about where, how would you like to be restored to a place of right relationship and what that would look like in kind of a more structural way. If I think about like calling someone in a context like Surge, where somebody who might be newish to the chapter comes in, they're a white person still learning, they say or do something that causes harm at, let's say, an event that we're at with some of our accountability partners and organizations, the calling in might look really different because it's going to have a lot more heart and love in it, clarity, but like, hey, I'm going to walk with you to like help you sort of, because someone walked with me, thank God. And like, it becomes more of like restorative justice is like, what is a work of sort of lovingly bringing someone into their own best self that they maybe have never actually gotten to be before. And that looks really different if there's a real relationship. And so I think these kinds of questions and strategizing, like asking that question, what does restorative justice look like in specific contexts, is actually some of the work that we need to be doing, right? Because sometimes we don't have those conversations. We just have a like, well, if this person does or says that, they're going to have to be out because that's embarrassing and makes us look bad. And actually, it would be amazing if in more of our justice spaces, we had those really granular contextual conversations about precisely that question.
Next question. Thank you, Dr. Harvey. How do you imagine persons with privilege tap into feeling in healthy ways instead of directing their feelings in the wrong direction?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a vital question. So some of the ways are those of us who are share that set of privileges, which whatever they might be. In my case, my examples tend to continually return to race. I really think that tapping into the feelings and the challenges that come with recognizing privilege and not directing them in inappropriate ways, and often at the communities that are sort of on the injustice side of the privilege that we've had access to, it can look like, so if you're working in an institutional context, right, creating spaces and places where folks who are starting to maybe ready themselves to tap into some of that grief and lament over, what really privilege is. I think Dr. Towns, you said this. You said years ago, I heard you say, if it's a right that's not being honored, it's really privileged, something like that. I'm sure I'm messing up the paraphrase, but what that means, like we use this nice, and it's not a nice word, but privilege, when really we're talking about violence and harm to somebody else, right? And so one of the things that we need to do, I think, is like be smart and strategic about it. If we're talking about helping folks move in an institution or organization, we need to create spaces for that, precisely that conversation. We need to create containers. Teachers do this all the time. We don't just start a conversation on reparations in my class. We spend a day crafting guidelines to not necessarily keep people safe, because I don't know you can do that, but certainly to mitigate risk of harm, and definitely to create expectations, right? We need to create containers where folks can do that. And then this gets into some of the calling in and out work, is those of us in these journeys, like I often will see myself as then like, oh, if I see that happening, part of my call is to walk up alongside that person and say, hey, can we take a right turn right here? And can we have this conversation? Because we need to collectively, this is the other thing going on in white anti-racism. We've got such individualistic sensibilities in it, which is actually part of white supremacy, right? We've got to start thinking about collective, collaborative community. And so like, I think like, oh, my work, part of it is to walk alongside that person, help them turn another direction. And they, you know what, you can come, say all this stuff right here. I'm going to hold space and we're going to engage. And maybe, hopefully, if I do it well, I've a little bit mitigated some of the harm that might come if that person did it to those who've been harmed by the privilege, right? So I'm not sure if that gets at the question, but I think it's again about thinking really strategically. We know what happens when white folks move into anti-racist yearnings. We know what happens. So we need to start to actually act like we know what happens and design and account for that. But that requires taking some risks because people don't always understand it. So like, what do you mean you're going to talk about, we just need to stop being so white fragile and everything will be fine. No, actually it won't.
Hello, Dr. Harvey. This is someone who knows you. Thank you for being here. I am curious to hear your thoughts on reparations. This is from Christina Gooden, our student government president.
Hello. I am a yes on reparations. That's the short response to my thoughts on reparations. Reparations for enslavement, yes. Reparations for genocide and land theft, yes. And dispossession, yes. I also am deeply aware of how limited reparations is and are for either of those realities. And I also am aware that there's many communities to whom reparations in various forms are also due. But I think, so the sort of my political yes response is yes, reparations and good process designed underneath and around it to enable truth-telling, reckoning, sort of telling the stories of our shared legacies, all of our shared legacies. These are legacies we share. I also, though, am more and more find myself clear that in context too, where, and this is really in Dear White Christians a lot, where reparations for enslavement or the way First Nations, Indigenous peoples have experienced white colonial settlerism, capitalism, is not necessarily the most accessible, immediate conversation. Like I'm thinking about Des Moines, Iowa, for example. Always thinking about repair and reparative justice. So that's like small r reparations as the model is, I think, how we should be moving. So we are constantly saying, this isn't about just trying to build interracial togetherness for this, that's the work. No, that actually might be the outcome of the work if we do repair well enough. So, we've got a model at Drake. Drake doesn't call it reparations. I do, but, called the Crew Scholars Program, where we've been doing a repair-based, well-resourced program for students of color. It's an academic excellence and leadership development program for students of color at Drake. We've had it for 9 years. And I just moved into my new role. I stepped away from being the faculty director. It's a reparations model. We've said, oh, it's not students who have deficits, it's the institution. We owe repair. So what does repair look like? And we have just built a program that's based on repair. It's reparative. It has been successful. We have Crew Scholars graduate, 91% of them do, higher than any other populations of students. And I think it's because we've built it on a repair model instead of a diversity model or a deficit model, and so, but that's not like reparations, but it is reparations. It's a kind of reparations, kind of taking responsibility for the work of repair. So that's how I sort of think about reparations.
From a friend and colleague of yours, Anna Vegan, leading, showing up with empathy again and again is exhausting. How do we avoid burnout? What have you found most helps build resilience?
So I love that question. I don't know that I always avoid burnout, but I'm working on that. I've been working on it. If there was one thing that the pandemic helped me get really serious about was like, oh, what is that? What does it mean to slow down sometimes? I think that, and like we say this all the time, but then we'll make jokes about how we don't do it. And actually it's not funny. Like we really need to learn to say no. Like we really need to decide this is my work, it is always going to feel like not enough. You know why? Because it's not enough. But I need to not have an overinflated sense of my own capacity and power, and instead humbly recognize I am part of a community of good ancestors and folks seeking to become a good ancestor who's been walking this for a long time. And I've got to focus sometimes, which means there's a lot of no's in my toolkit in the last 3 or 4 years. And that's really hard. But what I found is if we show up well and consistently around the work that we are called to do, that folks will respect and sort of hear it without, I don't worry. I try not to worry about people judging me if I say no, but mostly I will often hear then from folks, I appreciate you being able to set limits because we need you to keep doing this work. And I think that's true for all of us. So I think it's really concrete and practical. Like I was on the surge leadership team, for like 3 or 4 years. And then there was one day I was like, oh my God, I never see my family on Sundays. And I work a 40+ hour job. And I'm Jen, not going to be sustainable. And guess what? Surge doesn't need me to always be the one because I am not the one, right? So I think no is sometimes about humility. It's about returning to our bodies and recognizing like, I want to be in the work of justice for my entire life, which means I have to be responsible to that, which means saying no. It also means having fun, eating with people, laughing with people, art, music, all the things that have been much harder to sustain during the course of a pandemic, but feeding our actual embodied selves all the way. And laughing, really laughing is part of it. More and more as the older I get, I'm like, the more we laugh, that's why I could take a talk about white supremacy and make it about whether or not I'm going to let my kids have dessert after dinner. Because that's how absurd this all is. Like, it's not a careless laugh, but it's like, oh my God, this is our existential situation, right? And so we have to just keep sort of honoring that and naming it, and then loving each other up when we get tired and say, hey, go take a nap. Like the nap ministry, that amazing TikTok video that went around was that was divine truth that was being sung in that TikTok video.
We have 2 more questions, and then we will stop for now.
Okay.
Well, 3 more questions, and then that's it. As a person of color still growing in anti-racist practice for 22+ years, I have found that newer arrivals to this work are sometimes very committed to performance of anti-racism without the presence of accountable relationships. How have you called in their white counterparts away from performance toward the deep dwelling and practice?
So you might not love my answer to this question. I'm a little less worried about performativity than I think our collective conversation in anti-racist space is focused on right now. Not because I don't understand that white folks or straight folks or folks with class privilege, all the folks, right, can do things to kind of get a pat on the back and it doesn't really mean anything. Of course that happens, and of course that's a problem. But I don't spend much time trying to figure out if individuals are where their intention is. I sort of, when someone engages in a way that someone might think looks performative, if there's someone I know and is in my local context, the last thing I'm going to do is call them in and say it's a performance. What I do is go, oh my gosh, I saw your Facebook post. Can you come to this thing with me on Monday night since you care about this too? And so because sometimes performance is actually how people grow a new muscle. And that sounds maybe a little bit strange to say, but I'm not saying Facebook memes are going to bring in the revolution. I'm not saying that. But there are a lot of white people that like just posting something on Facebook, we like can actually have you like become the pariah in your family. And that's no small thing, right? It doesn't change Drake University when I do that, but I'm aware of performance and virtue signaling and all of that. But I'm going to tell you this quick story. I have a colleague who for years at Drake has been a respectful, I respect him, he respects me. We've engaged in lots of disagreements about race over the years, about equity and reparations, reparative justice, and certainly about Black Lives Matter, as I've sort of been louder and louder about those politics, the movement and et cetera here at Drake. White guy, older white guy, perfectly kind human, cares about his students, respectful disagreement. In 2020, after George Floyd was murdered, this man who also I knew thought I was kind of silly, like I would just sort of feel he never said anything, but in his vibe, he would sometimes, I could tell he thought I was like kind of overly zealous and simplistic over the years, right? Whatever. Well, I was down at some of the rallies and protests in 2020, in summer of 2020, and I come around this corner and there he is. And this man, this very awkward older white man in the sciences is wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt that he clearly made by hand. And he's trying to chant with the chants. And it's totally like, he's so embarrassed, like not embarrassed, but he's like really awkward. He even tries, these young Black activists in Des Moines were like calling people to put their fists in the air. And he was like, okay. And I saw him and he saw me and he looked kind of like, I'm supposed to be here, right? And I really thought when folks, like I've thought about that story a lot because I'm like, I don't know when or how he's continued his activism, but I know who I'm going to call as I need some stuff done at Drake. And I also know that he could be easily dismissed as that was performance. He showed up at a protest. So what? Oh my God. He handmade a Black Lives Matter shirt. That doesn't change the world, but he was there and I saw him. And so Drake, he's going to be on my call list, right? So I just think that's how I think about this, because if white folks are performing stuff, I'm going to call them in on it. Say, let's go. I'm not going to call them out and tell them I'm just gonna be like, come on, oh wait, let's go. I'm going to like proof is in the pudding. Let's go. Yay, another person. So that's my response to that discussion that's like really raging loudly right now.
I really appreciate your framing of hope. Can you say a bit more about how you are learning to build capacity for the long haul, particularly in collaboration with both white folks and people of color?
Sure. I would say that is something in my life journey that I've been building for a long, long time, like 30 years. I would say 30 years, probably about the time I hit 20 and started reading Cone. I started on an explicit journey, I would say, without knowing that's what I was doing, but that's when it really began. And for me, resilience and, was that the word, resilience, or what was how you build?
Build capacity for the long haul.
For the long haul. So I'm thinking about the long haul. The capacity building part is ongoing. And so the more any of us take the risk of stepping into collective space where justice is the work, whatever that might be, the more we take the risk of doing that, even though we don't yet have capacity built, the more we start to build our capacity. Like, because it's not head knowledge. Like a lot of white folks get stuck, like I got to read all the books first, which is also quite a classist way of framing this whole discussion about anti-racism, just for the record. And then I'll go and do this all correct. No, friends. We build capacity as we go. And the long haul work of it, for me, the reason long haul has never, not that I don't get tired or frustrated or sad or any of that, but for me, the long haul piece has never been a question, only because in the capacity building piece, because I've been in communities where that's happened, justice issues have never been abstract for me. And that's what we need to grow in our spaces, right? Justice is about people who I love. And I don't have to ask, do I keep showing up for so-and-so? That's just what we do when we know one another. And so I think capacity building happens best in community. though we can feed it with concepts and tools, yes, but happens best in communities where people are practicing together and taking risks, even when it's messy. And I think we long haul the work of capacity building and our commitment to justice by those same communities becoming real people, humanizing, as Dean Town said earlier, relationships in our lives where it's just not even a question. I don't just stop showing up for family, chosen family, especially in my case. And that's who I see when the call goes out, because something's happened in Des Moines, is people who are beloved to me and I to them. So it's not even a question, right? Tomorrow night, I'll be at the school board in West Des Moines, where my neighbor and friend, Finette Elliott, just one Black woman on the school board. And now her beautiful Families of Color group is getting threatened by a mad white parent. So you know what? There's like, we're going to go down there like 25 de-escalating white folks and say, no, you're not coming in this space, right? I'm going to be tired tomorrow night, but it's Finette. She's my friend, you know, and she's taking all this risk. So it just, that's how we build long haul, is we make this not abstract, but about actual relationships. And that's hard to do in a segregated world. We have to desegregate our lives.
Last question for the evening. Thank you for your passion and eloquence. Do you have any thoughts about ways that humor can be used to deal with the very serious subjects you are discussing?
If I do, it's only in that I tend to myself, as I think about how absurd this human journey is, especially when I put it in like thinking about like what it means to try and like drive my kids to school and then come deal with, you know, white nationalist threats in my email box. Sort of like, you know what, this is just absurd. And I think theology, like this deeper sense of like, this life is finite and limited and short. My theological rootedness, sort of, I think theological rootedness and sort of a sense of like humble awareness of like how limited this all is helps me find some humor in talking about really, really real, heavy, difficult, violent realities in ways that also are like, this is our human predicament. But I don't know sort of how to do that. But I mostly know it when I hear it in others who do it well. And I know that we need it. I know that we need it because humor is also a form of processing grief. Comedians are brilliant, not all of them equally brilliant. I'll just say that, but so I know we need it, but I don't quite know how to do it. I have a sister though who's very funny. She started doing stand-up in the last 2 years and she's really funny and helping with all of this. So
thank you, Dr. Harvey. It has been so good to have you with us, and we have kept you on longer than usual because of the number of questions your talk has inspired. One thing I do want to say as we go is that we have a tradition of framing the poster for the talk for the speaker, and we will send that to you when you can display it in a place of prominence as you wish. So Shatika will be sending it your way in the next.
It's so beautiful. Thank you so much. It's so beautiful. Oh, thanks.
We have really good people with very good design sense. So thank you, Shatika Brown, for that.
Thank you, Shatika.
And one last word, our next public lecture will be in February on the 21st at 4 p.m. Dr. Paul DeHart, our professor of theology, will be doing the Bogich lecture. That's the lecture that it is in. The speaker is a member of the Vanderbilt University faculty. Please all take care of yourselves, watch your health, physically distance, masked up, stay safe. We wish you a good night. Bye.